Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning. So, we would be starting today with the introduction to IT industry and project. So, we would essentially learn about what is a little bit about IT industry, what are projects, what are processes in IT industry, how the IT industry is categorized as a whole. Then we would learn something about the different nature of projects like fixed price projects or billing projects. We would also touch base upon the various organization of IT industry in terms of project, program and portfolio and what are these things. Apart from that, we would also see through a request for proposal document. So this is our agenda for today. We'll start our session with the IT industry and software industry introduction. Now, if you consider information technology industry, it is mainly driven by two major components. One is your operations and one is your software industry. Now, operations industry is something like which are of operational category. For example, there is a banking system. So there is a back office associated to a banking system wherein you call up every day and solve your day-to-day issues with their customer service representative. So essentially, this particular area deals with your operations or commonly known as business process outsourcing as well. So similar to banking industry, we have operations in our insurance, we have operations in our healthcare. Any XYZ domain you say, we have our operation projects up and running. Then there is software industry. Predominantly, people often refer IT industry as software industry, wherein we tend to develop different sort of software, irrespective of whatever technology the software is being developed. Now, when it comes to software, there are essentially different technologies that exist. Then there are different areas the software industry exists. Then there are different processes in which the software development works. So together as a whole, they are called as software industry. Now, in today's scenario, if you consider we are in an era wherein most of the things are available on cloud. So gone are those days wherein we used to develop the software, then go to the client place and install it into their system. So today is not, I mean, the scenario is not the same in today's world. So in today's world, people develop the software, they promote it to the cloud infrastructure, and if a user wants to use their particular software, they would subscribe to their software and start using their software on the cloud premises itself. Or if they would like to go for a manual installation, that installation is also available to the user in today's scenario as well. But mostly, if you consider the space, the software industry space in today's landscape is completely cloud driven. So we have all our software installed over the cloud, and as and when need arises, people go and use those particular software. For example, if you consider your any Microsoft suite of product, they have their cloud version available over there, like Microsoft Office 365. So people pay for a subscription, a monthly subscription or a yearly subscription, and they directly go and use that software over there. Then there are offline versions available for Microsoft Office as well, which you can purchase upright and install it on your computer and start using it. Now, what's the difference between the offline installation and using it over the cloud? So the major differentiation over here is the cost. If you consider a offline version of a software, that particular software is usable to you, but the price is a bit higher. But if you consider the same software which is available on cloud, you just need to pay a minimal subscription amount. It could be billed on a monthly basis or it could be billed on an annual basis. So price is a major factor which differentiates between these two category of software. So predominantly, whatever software you consider, it's not only about Microsoft. If you consider your Tableau, if you consider your Adobe suite of software, any XYZ software you consider in today's landscape, for that matter, Jira or any requirement management tool, most of them are offering the cloud variants of that particular software. And also there is one more factor which differentiates between offline installation and hosting on cloud is the cost of hosting. If you install it offline, your particular XYZ software, there is a hosting cost associated to it. Your company would host it on a particular server. There is a server cost associated to it. Now in servers also there are different variation, like what is the need of hosting that particular software in that particular server, like in a given day how much should be the time frame wherein the server should be up and running. If there is a server failure, what would be the cost of that particular failure? So in contrary, if you consider the cloud environment, they guarantee 100% uptime of your particular server. You need not to worry about the server failure or server outage or any XYZ issue. All the server related issue would be taken care of by your vendor company who is hosting that particular application into their server. So this is an overview of the software industry, like how the infrastructure of software works in IT industry, the offline version and the online version. So it has nothing to do with our business analysis work, but since we would be heavily dealing with the softwares and gathering requirements and analyzing requirements in and around software, it is very important for us to understand a little bit about how is the infrastructure or the underlying infrastructure in and around software industry works. So if you consider cloud, there are different variations like SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, MaaS, AaaS. So these are different versions or variation by which your cloud services is offered to you in a typical software industry. Now, this is where we start our session in terms of understanding the projects. Now, when you consider information technology industry, there are essentially two categories of companies which are operable in this industry landscape. One is your product-based company and one is your service-based company. Now, product-based companies are the companies who build their own product and sell in the market. For example, your Microsoft is a product-based company. Now, can anyone give me an example of any other type of product-based company? It's not necessary it has to be a software product. It could be any product as a whole. Can you please come again? I didn't hear that. Yes, yes. SAP is a product. Yes,
Apple,
yes. Apple mobile phone or their laptops or their gadgets, they are also considered as products. So product essentially doesn't mean it has to be a physical product. It could be a software product as well. So in that sense, can I say mutual fund is a product or not?
could you can please come again?
Can I say mutual fund or credit cards as product or not?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Because ultimately they are finance domain products. Your credit card, your mutual fund, or your stocks, equities, they are products itself in finance domain, in and around which we develop our system. So let's say tomorrow you are developing a fund management system which essentially deals with different mutual funds that are available in your particular finance space. So those mutual funds would serve as product to that system, so they are also product. Similarly, in insurance domain, your auto product, your homeowner product, or any XYZ product, they are considered as product. Now coming to service based company, building product application or part of them for other companies and their client and customer. So service-based company, they only offer services to this product-based company. They may develop their own product, but essentially their core area of function is supporting the product development of other companies. For example, if let's say JP Morgan comes to an XYZ company and they say, okay, we have a product that needs to be developed for our company. So we would like to utilize your services. So the XYZ company, they would say, okay, we would be developing your product. Ultimately, the product, all the licenses, all the XYZ parameters that are associated with their product, the accountability would lie with JP Morgan, but the services would be offered by XYZ company. Now, what all could be the services that the service-based industry can offer to JP Morgan? The services would be development. The services would be consulting services, wherein we would work heavily as a business analyst. The services can be a testing services. The services can be infrastructure services if they want to host their application in any XYZ environment. So in that context, they would seek infrastructure related services from whatever XYZ company they have contracted that particular product. So remember one thing, that when you are developing a particular product, I mean a company or the outsourcing company, when they intend to develop a particular product, they may give the entire contract to a service-based company, or they may give contract in parts. For example, JP Morgan wants to develop a fund management system. So they may give development work to, let's say, Cognizant, analysis work, let's say, to Accenture, testing work, let's say, to any XYZ company, and infrastructure work to any XYZ company. So it's not mandate that entire end-to-end project would be outsourced to service-based company. It may come as phase, or in some cases it may come entirely, depending on the nature and size of the project, like how big that particular project is. Any questions, anyone so far? Okay. Now, when we say project and when we say product, there's a difference between these two. Project are essentially temporary in nature. Okay, temporary in nature as in they would be having a start and end. Let's say I want to outsource a particular project to a XYZ company. My project duration would be of 1 year. Within 1 year, that particular project has to be completed. Whereas if you consider a product would definitely be having a start time, but it would keep on incrementing until and unless the demand for that product is no more needed. For example, if you consider a Google product, there was a product called as Orkut. It was a social networking site of Google. Now, the product kept on incrementing for several years until Facebook introduced itself. Once Facebook started capturing the market, the product became obsolete. So what Google did, they officially terminated that particular product. So similarly, there are many other XYZ examples wherein the products initiated, but due to their lack of acceptance by the end user, the product eventually got terminated, or the project, the product development process eventually got terminated. Now, that is where the product is different from a project. A project would always have a beginning and end, whereas the product would have a beginning, but it would only have an end if the end users are no longer interested in that particular product. So there are many instances which you could relate to in this particular scenario. And one beautiful thing about product is that it keeps on incrementing, unlike your project. Now, once you developed a particular project for your operation team, there are very minimal changes that you make to that particular project. Only after 4 or 5 years, you completely retire that particular project and start developing a new that particular project in any XYZ new technology. That is not the case with product. Product keeps on evolving with the demand of the users. So you can say every month the product keeps on evolving depending on the feedback they receive from the user, which is not the case with project. Now the third important point about product is the product is mostly in standard commercial off the shelf solution. Can anyone relate this COTS to something? I mean, if you have came across this particular term anywhere.
Mm.
As per my understanding, commercial off the shelf means that it can be bought or it's tangible. Maybe it can be like bought over the counter. I'm not sure.
Okay, any other views? Okay, so what commercial off the shelf means? For example, let's consider there are 10 users for a particular product. Now, 10 users would be purchasing this particular product. Okay, now this particular product comes with 10 unique features. Now, the users who have purchased that particular product, they are convinced that okay, whatever basic necessity is there in terms of our business solution, this product offers us. Now, there are certain users out of that 10 users, let's say 7 users, they are convinced with that particular product who they have purchased, and the other 3 users, they want something additional to that particular product. Now that additional part is called as customization of that particular product. You can always purchase a product and start using it in its vanilla form. But when you start customizing that particular product, that is something you are customizing that particular product as per your business needs. So in any particular domain, in insurance or banking or any XYZ domain, there are many vendors who are offering COTS product, commercial off the shelf product. But does it solve the business needs always? No, it never solves the business needs always, because everyone's business is different. Let's say there is a banking software Finacle. Now there are certain customer like JP Morgan, there is customer Bank of America, then there is customer your Citibank. They bought that Finacle product for themselves, but they realized after bringing that particular product, okay, whatever the core functionality the product is offering to us, that is fine, but our business needs something additional. So what these banks would do, they would purchase this product, they would start using their core functionalities. At the same time, they would start enhancing that particular product depending on their business needs. Now, how this business needs arises? This business needs arises depending on how they do the business with the customer. For example, Citibank may say that, okay, we don't want to operate in this particular region. We want to operate in this particular selective region. Now, Bank of America would say, we want to introduce ourselves to any new emerging region. So when they introduce themselves to new emerging region, their regulatory norms would be different. The way that particular country does business is different. So what they would eventually do, they would start customizing this particular product as per their particular need. So that is where the product lags behind project. So project is then initiated. Now, whatever customization would arise out of this particular product, that would ultimately transform into a project, which would have a definite beginning and end. So you can say that software product adoption is very easy. It is very cost effective because cost for developing a product is much less than cost for developing a particular project. So you have essentially saved the time and cost in and around developing the project from scratch because you have purchased that particular product. But this product doesn't suffice the need of the business. For that reason, you tend to customize that particular product, and that particular customization would go as project and would be outsourced to your service based company. So in today's landscape, I have seen multiple companies, they are opting for purchasing of a particular product within their particular domain, because there is no longer a scenario wherein, at least as I have seen, wherein companies are starting up with building their own projects, because every domain has evolved so much in today's scenario that they have multiple products to support their business at this point of time. So no one is investing a Scratch development during this tenure. I mean this era. So that is the reason why waterfall development is getting obsolete day by day, which was initially focused only into developing the project right from scratch. Because in today's landscape, no more Scratch development are happening in the industry. Okay, any questions, anyone? Feel free to ask questions that would help me understand whether you are getting the concepts or not. Okay, now coming to the costing part. Now we have seen how the what is software industry. We have seen what are the category of projects, what is the difference between projects and products, what is service-based company and what is product-based company. Now we will see the costing part of this particular projects. Now, when an outsourcing company outsources a company to a vendor company, now outsourcing company is the company who pays for that particular development, and vendor is the company who gets paid for doing that work and ultimately delivers that work to the outsourcing company. Now, when these two parties they come into a contract, there are two things. One is fixed bid projects and one is billing or time and material projects. Now, what's the difference between fixed bid project and time and material project? Now, essentially, in fixed bid project, what happens? Let's say I want to outsource a contract for a period of 1 year. Now, in that particular 1 year period, I may employ 100 resources, I may employ 200 resources. That is none of outsourcing company's business. It is completely dependent on the vendor company. The outsourcing company would pay an upright contract amount of 1 million and 2 million to the vendor company, and they would say this is the end date of the project. You have to deliver me that particular project at the end of this date. Now, when it comes to time and material projects, they are built based on the time and resources. For example, if you add any additional single resource to a particular project, it would be billed to the customer. Customer as in your outsourcing company, which is not the case with fixed bid project. It's like they have given a valuation to a particular package. Now that package could contain resources, could contain your software licenses, could contain your infrastructure related assets, anything, any XYZ project. They would only pay for the package, not for the components within that particular package. But here they have to pay for every individual components within that particular package, like your resources, your software licensing, your any XYZ cost, your infrastructure cost, your travel cost, any XYZ cost that is arising out of execution of that particular project. So these are essentially two ways by which IT projects contract works: the fixed bid and the time and material project contract. Any questions, anyone?
Can you explain me one more time for the big project, fixed big project?
Okay, so fixed bid project is like, so we have fixed bid project and we have time and material project. Now fixed bid project is like, it's an upfront cost for the contract. Now this contract can be of 1 year or 2 year, depending on the nature and size of the project. Now upfront cost as in, it could be 1 million contract or it would be 2 million contract. Now coming to time and material projects, herein everything associated to particular project would be built. For example, resources. Now resources could be your developer, could be your quality assurance, could be your business analyst. This would be your resources. Now developer would be billed, let's say, for an hourly rate of $25 per hour. QA would be billed, let's say, for an hourly rate of $22 per hour. BA would be billed, let's say, for an hourly rate of $45 per hour. Then there would be software licensing cost. Now, software licensing cost can be, let's say, $2,500 for that particular project. Then there would be your travel cost or logistic cost. Now, what are this logistic cost? Logistic cost is like, let's say you are going to a client place for requirement gathering or understanding the requirement. So there are certain logistic costs involved for that particular project, like the traveling cost, your hotel accommodation cost, your food and XYZ cost. So they tend to keep a budget of, let's say, $5,000 for that particular cost. So at the end, after every month, okay, they would be billed for every month. Every month, depending on these parameters, the customer would be billed, and this billing can increase and can decrease after month on month. But in fixed bid cost, it's an upfront cost of 1 million. So they need not to worry about these things. They would say you can hire one developer, you can hire 10 developer, it's up to you, but this is the upfront cost we would pay to you, and you have to manage all this thing by yourself. Okay, so when to use fixed bid project and when to use billing project. Now there are certain situations, not always the same situation. It would completely depend on your organization and the actual situation of the work which you are doing. So these are some generic situations which are there in order to help you understand when to use billing project and when to use fixed bid project. When the requirements are not clear, you can go for time and material projects. So what happens essentially is requirement gathering takes a lot of time in a particular project, let's say 3 months or 4 months. Now, if your requirements are not clear, so essentially you have to conduct multiple chat sessions. For that, you may have to travel to your client's place very frequently, and that would ultimately add up to your logistic cost. So for that reason, you would be adopting a time and material nature or time and material engagement for that particular project. When the projects are spread over several months to several years, when we are unsure about what would be the actual duration of the project. So the customer gave us initial requirement, but we are not sure when the project would end. In that case also, we would be using time and material project. When you require high degree of flexibility as in, so there could be a situation that in September month you would be needing 10 developers. In October month the workload may be less, so you would be needing 5 developers. In November month you would needing let's say 2 developers, but suddenly the surge of the demand increased, and in the month of December you would be needing 20 developers. So what happens over here is your project is getting flexible. Your demand is not constant. The demand is constantly fluctuating. So for that, in order to support the high degree of flexibility, you should always go for time and material projects. Now, fourth pointer talks about when you want the project process to be tailored to your requirement. Now, processes is like, for example, there are different project processes in place today. You have PMP way of managing the project. You have Prince2 way of managing the project. You have Agile way of managing the project. In Agile, there is Scrum, then is Kanban, then there is DevOps, then there is any XYZ methodology in place. Now, when you have to tailor your requirement customized to your particular project, in that case also you would go with time and material project, because all of these frameworks, whether it's Prince2, Agile, Scrum, Kanban, they have a defined set of phases, they have a defined set of activities to be done during their execution, but we are customizing that particular processes as per our requirement. So that customization is something that has to go via time and material project engagement. Now, when you want the resources to be controlled directly, now, like we saw in that particular example, we need to have a track on how many developers are there in our particular project, what is their billing rate, how many QAs are there in our particular project, what is their billing rate, how many business analysts are there in our project, and what is their billing rate. So what essentially we are doing, we are essentially controlling our resources directly. So in that scenario also, we would be using time and material project. Then when you want simplicity and want to avoid the complexity, that always creeps into large software product or projects. Now, what is this term creep mean? Creep is a term which you as a business analyst would often encounter when you start working actually in your projects. So creep is like your customer asked you to develop 10 features. Customer as in the outsourcing company. And you as a vendor, you agreed them to deliver that particular 10 features. Now, of late, this is a case about 1 year contract project. Now, of late, on the 7th month or 8th month, customer is trying to give you some additional work. Additional work as in additional request to develop. Now you check in the list of 10 features which customer has already given you. Now those additional items are not part of that 10 feature list. So what essentially customer is doing, they are trying to creep the scope. So there are essentially three things in business analysis or in project management industry as well. One is in scope, one is out of scope, and then there is actual scope. Actual scope is, let's say, 10 features. Okay, now this 10 feature is your actual in scope item which you would deliver after the completion of the project. Now out of scope item is anything additional to 10 items. So let's say if customer is adding 2 more additional features, that would be considered as out of scope. We cannot take those 2 features in scope because your scope is already defined. So whenever your customer would ask you to add these 2 items into the scope, that is essentially termed as scope creep in analysis world. So you need to ensure the scope is never creeped. Now, this essentially happens in a case when the project is fixed bid in nature, wherein they have paid upfront 1 million or 2 million, and the time cost is defined. But what in case of time and billing project? Time and material project or billing project? In time and material project, you can always welcome scope creeping. So that's the difference. You cannot entertain scope creeping in fixed bid project, whereas you can take scope creep in time and material project, because whenever scope creeps, a new requirement is coming to your particular project and it would be freshly built. So we can take that particular item in time and material project, but we need to ensure that we avoid that scope creeps by timely informing our senior managers or managers that look, customer is trying to creep the scope and we need to do something about it, because customers are very clever. They would ask you to do some free work for them which are no way related to the actual agreed scope as per the contract. So you as a business analyst are the first point of contact in terms of identifying these scope creeps in any XYZ project. Next is when you want a fixed and dedicated team. So if you would like to have a fixed team of, let's say, out of 10 developers, let's say you want to have a fixed team of 5 developers and rest 5 can be fluctuating depending on the demand of the particular project. So you can go for time and material project. Now let us examine what are the considerations that we need to do when we deal with fixed bid projects. So when the requirements are clear and defined in detail. So whenever our requirements are very clear and defined in detail with the help of a business requirement document or functional specification document or software requirement specification, and all the corresponding artifacts like UML, use cases, data dictionary, any XYZ artifacts are in place, in that context, we would always go for fixed bid project. Now, when the projects are spread over a few days to few months, so it is not for a longer duration. If your project is of very few days or very few months, then you can go for fixed bid projects, wherein the requirements are already there and we know the timing or the timelines upfront when the project would end. So in that context, we can go for fixed bid projects. Then when you have little or no flexibility on the project requirement. So little or no flexibility as in this also the requirements are altered or fabricated at some point of time, but not contributing to the scope creep. So it cannot contribute at scope creep. For example, if someone says that instead of checkbox, put drop down list. So that is a flexible requirement. That sort of flexibility we can entertain. But if someone says to completely change the functionality of a drop down and transform it to a checkbox, that is something called as scope creep. So minimal UI changes you can accept in fixed bid project, but not changing the entire functionality. That would be considered as scope creep and go to time and material engagement. The fourth pointer talks about when you want to determine the exact budget in advance. So this is wherein you go through a formal process of understanding the project, what we would be needing in terms of executing that project, in terms of resource, in terms of software licensing, in terms of logistics. If everything is known upfront, in that case, we can estimate the exact budget of the project in advance and we can go for fixed bid project. Now, when you don't want to have a direct control on resources. So this statement or this dialogue is from an outsourcer perspective. Outsourcer as in the company who pays for the project. If they do not want to have any direct control on the resources, they hardly care about who is the resources. Their ultimate goal is to get the work done. So in that context also, they can go for fixed bid project. So this is how your time and material project and fixed bid projects are different in nature. Now my question to you, can agile be considered as fixed bid project or time and material project? If anyone knows anything about agile.
As for me, it can be anything.
Absolutely, it
Uh,
can be anything. There is no hard and fast rule like we have to categorize the project depending on the methodology. It could be waterfall, it could be agile, it could be any XYZ methodology. Methodology has no relation on the costing and budgeting part. This is something, an agreement that people enter into. It can be executed via agile way, it can be executed via waterfall way or any XYZ way as well. So this is how the approaches look like. So we have, in the context of fixed bid project, we have the understanding of the project, then we have the requirement gathering phase wherein we as a business analyst pitch in, then we have proposal and schedule of the project wherein the project managers pitch in, they create the proposals and prepare a schedule for that particular project, then the contract is signed, the development work starts, the QA and XYZ work happens in between this, and finally it is delivered. Now, if you consider the same thing in the context of time and material project, there is a pre-startup phase wherein you understand your requirement, identify goals. Then there is a startup phase wherein you determine the infrastructure requirement, you determine the resource requirement, you, excuse me, you do the negotiation on the costing and budgeting part, then you sign up the contract. Then you start executing that particular uh, plan, like searching for the candidate, pre-screening people, finalizing interview, finalizing your team, setting up the infrastructure, then process your setup. Then if there are any on-site resources needed, and if they need any training, whether they understand the application, you need to check the on-site exposure as well. After that, you do the knowledge transition transfer activity, wherein you start with your development activity and your project communication. And after that, you do the reporting and statuses and management and support. So if you could see here, pre-startup, startup, execution, on-site exposure, until it actually comes to development, there is a huge difference in terms of this. So here we have the requirements upfront. We do the minimal requirements that we need in this particular phase. We do the proposal and scheduling very instantly. We sign the contract and we start the development work. But here the time frame is more. Here it is 21 days. So remember, this is not a what I would say hard and fast rule that you have to take 21 days to complete this and 4 days to complete this. This is just an indicative number in terms of days. But if you consider this example, the time taken for this particular engagement and the time taken for this particular engagement, there's a huge difference. So that is why, depending on the nature of the project, people often go for fixed bid projects. In these days, most of the contracts are fixed bid in nature, irrespective of the fact that the requirements are not clear upfront, but still they insist on going for fixed bid projects. Okay, any questions, anyone so far? Anything that we have covered? Okay, now we'll see organizational hierarchy in IT industry. So, IT industry organizational hierarchy, if you consider, it starts from bottom and goes up to top. For example, under project management, your team would be there: the development team, the quality assurance team, the business analyst team, the testing team, and any XYZ team. They all would come under project management. After that, there is program management, a level up. Now, program is something that would comprise of multiple projects. Okay, so let's say there is a program going on for JP Morgan. Now, JP Morgan could be having multiple projects under them. For example, fund management project, or credit card management project, or your lending project, or lease management project. There would be any XYZ project under that JP Morgan program. Now, above that particular program, there is portfolio. Now, portfolio can have program under them and can also have project under them. And towards the top is your organizational goal and strategy. So these are the C cadre managers who are only accountable for developing the strategies for their particular organization. Now those strategy would be incorporated by first by the portfolio managers, then taken over by your program managers, and then taken over by project managers. So one program manager can handle multiple project managers. One portfolio manager can handle multiple program managers and project managers. And strategic goals are handled by the people who are above your portfolio manager. For example, your program director, or your practice director, or your principal consultant, or business architect, if you consider from a business analysis standpoint. So there are two aspects to it. One aspect is your project manager aspect, wherein you would be having your portfolio manager, program manager, and project manager. And then there would be a business analysis aspect, wherein it would start with your principal consultant, senior consultant, and your consultants, and your any hierarchy which are below that. For example, associate business analyst, junior business analyst, and so on. So depending on this particular pyramid, the role would increment from bottom to top. Now, if we see the strategy, an organization strategy creates a portfolio. After that creation of that particular portfolio, your programs and projects are launched. So a portfolio can have both projects and programs. Now, to give you an example, an organizational strategy could be that we want to go digital within a period of 3 years. Now, when we say, when the organization says they want to go digital in a period of 3 years, now what do they mean? So, what they would do, they would essentially create a portfolio that they will intend to go digital. Now, under digital, they would be launching different programs and projects. Now, digital in the space of insurance, digital in the space of banking, digital in the space of healthcare. So these three would be the programs. Now under this program would be your projects. Now for example, digital in the space of banking. Now banking can have 10 different projects under them. Similarly, your healthcare or insurance would be having 10 different projects under them. Now this project would be having a different goal to achieve. For example, digitizing the entire customer service experience, digitizing the entire lending process, digitizing the entire mortgagee process, digitizing the entire agent process, digitizing the entire underwriter process. So these all things would go as individual projects under that particular program. So this is how your organizational strategy arises to your portfolios, your portfolio arises to your program and your projects at the same time. And a single program can have multiple projects under them. So if you see, the top level is your portfolio, followed by your program and followed by your project. So portfolio managements are led by the business goal alignment, business value alignment, program selection and portfolio optimization, which essentially gives the value to the business. Now, program is sponsored by the business owners of benefits. Multiple projects can come under program. It gives value to your stakeholder, and projects give quality deliverables. So what's the difference between business value, stakeholder value and quality deliverables? Now, we would start with quality deliverables. Quality deliverable is in what is the intention of initiating that particular project. For example, if I say I want to digitize the entire agent process, that means the quality deliverable would be whether via a system I am able to digitize the entire agent process or not. Are there any manual process in between? If yes, then the quality is not delivered. If there is no manual intervention in between, I have completely digitized the end-to-end agent process, right from collection of information from the customer till feeding that particular information to the system. Everything is digitized. That means I have given the quality deliverable as a project manager. Now, since the project manager gave a quality deliverable, the value got added to the program manager, which is nothing but your stakeholder. So stakeholder can be your project manager, can be your business analyst, can be your program manager, can be your portfolio manager. Anyone who sees a value in that particular project execution is termed as a particular stakeholder. Now, end-to-end agency process is digitized. The value is delivered to the stakeholder. Now it's time for business value. So business value is like when JP Morgan would see as, the portfolio manager of the company would see that, okay, the end-to-end agency process is completely digitized now. So that is ultimately it added up to the business value when your actual deliverables are in operation. So the project is completed, all the quality check has been completed. Now the project has been opened to the end customer, wherein agents in real scenario have started using that particular system and they have given their feedback. So that is where you achieve your business value. and towards the top is your strategy, how your organization is strategic. Any questions, anyone? Okay. Now, there are certain role-based hierarchy in project structure in IT industry, and then there are some responsibility-based hierarchy. Now, role-based hierarchy is like who sits on top of which role. For example, on top of a business analyst, a project manager has always been there. On top of your quality assurance person, a quality assurance lead would be there, and a QA manager would be there. On top of a developer, what I would say, technical lead would be there, and on top of technical lead, a technical manager would be there, and on top of technical manager, your XYZ people would be there. Same case, if we map it to the responsibility, there are certain responsibilities that a particular role needs to do. For example, a developer needs to do the coding, they need to do all the unit testing, they need to understand the requirement from the business analyst, they need to clarify all the requirement, they need to implement those requirements into the system. These are responsibilities of a developer. Now, what are the responsibilities of a business analyst? So business analyst would be responsible for interacting with the customer, conducting all the necessary interview session with the customer, then what I would say, uh, gathering all the requirements, articulating all the requirements in terms of all the documents or the artifacts that are available. So these are some of the responsibility of a business analyst. So this way, all the roles in IT industries are categorized based on their responsibility, like who would be responsible for what set of activities. Now, in between, there are certain responsibilities which are common across the role. For example, sending status reports to your project manager. Now, this is a responsibility which is common for a business analyst, which is common for a developer, and for a QA person. So, this way, there can be a situation wherein a responsibility can overlap across multiple roles, and there would be a situation wherein the responsibility is exclusively intended for that particular role, like your BA, QA, or development team. So this is also a way of categorizing or organizing your project structure in IT industry. Now these are some of the key roles. We would see some of the roles. For example, the role is project sponsor. Now project sponsor would always be from your customer side. Customer side as in your outsourcing company, like your Apple system outsourcing a project to Accenture. So Apple system would be having a project sponsor. So project sponsor is essentially a person who funds the particular project. Funds as in he pays for that particular project, the contract for that amount for that particular project for that particular period of time. If it's a 1 year contract, he would pay 1 million or 2 million depending on the agreement of that particular contract. Then there is supporting sponsor. He would give the necessary guidance to this project sponsor that whether selecting Accenture as a vendor would be beneficial for us or not, whether releasing that particular set of funds would be beneficial for us or not. So he is your supporting sponsor. Now essentially what happens is, let's say Apple system, they approved a particular project for Accenture, okay, and they paid the amount for 1 year. Now after 1 year, they see that they are not getting the value they have perceived before outsourcing that particular contract to Accenture. So they always have the option to switch the vendor or replace the vendor. In that case, what they would do, they would continue working on that project, but the vendor from Accenture would be replaced to any XYZ vendor. It could be Cognizant or any XYZ vendor. So that kind of direction is something that is being given by your supporting sponsor to the project sponsor, because project sponsor has many XYZ roles and responsibilities to follow, because he sits at the higher level, to be very precise at a strategic level. So he would be needing an helping hand. So supporting sponsor is his or her helping hand. Then comes your program director. So project director. So this person, he directs the projects in terms of its accountability and responsibility for the project success. For example, this is the person who has already experience with the nature of the project. So what is the meaning that we conclude when I say nature of the project? Now, nature of the project is like, if the project is being executed in finance domain, so there are multiple project managers who are already working in that particular finance domain. Now, this particular project director, he is an experienced person who already have a elite portfolio of executing finance domain projects since last 20 to 25 years. So he is now at the position of giving direction in terms of evaluating what are the success criteria for that particular project and what are the failure criteria for that particular project if it has been taken by that particular organization. So he gives the necessary direction in terms of accountability and responsibility for that particular project. Whether the project, if taken by that particular company, will it be successful or not? That is something the project director would um, decide on. So there is one more role called as program director. They also do the more or less the same thing, giving the direction to the other project managers or project what I would say uh, consultants. Then there is an executive committee. So they check on the authority level of that particular organization. For example, if you consider a board of director, so it could appoint a executive committee in a particular organization to check through whether all the projects are working properly or not. Now, what do I mean by working properly? So let's say there is an organization A. Now, in that organization A, there may be 100 projects going on. Now, out of those 100 projects, which are the projects which are doing good? Which are the projects which they are doing average? And which are the projects they are doing bad? So that is the information which this executive committee needs to review on time to time basis. For example, projects typically have three statuses. One is your red, when the project is not meeting the expectation, which is very bad. Then we have amber, wherein the project is going average, but if something are not done properly, then the project status would change to red. And then we have the third status, that is green. That means the project is doing exceptionally well. There are no issues or roadblocks in terms of execution of that particular project. So this executive committee, they keep track on these statuses of the project. So they are no way concerned about what are the actual challenges in the project, whereas their only concern is about the statuses of the project, whether the project status is red, green or amber. If so, then they would report it to your project director or program director, and appropriate action would be taken in order to mitigate that particular risk. After that, there is steering committee or project board. Now, this particular committee or board, they keep on contributing towards the improvisation of the project processes. When I say project processes, the way how the project is executed, they would review the project on a time to time basis and they would give you the suggestion. This way you can improvise your particular project, or this way you can handle the particular project. Now, project manager is the person who has essentially three activities to perform: plan, track, and manage. So he creates a project plan. He would create work items for you as a business analyst, as a developer, or as a quality assurance person. He would divide the hours in terms of week. He would create a end-to-end plan in terms of, in first week, what are your activities, in second week what should be your activity, in third week what should be your activity. He creates a plan, then he keeps on monitoring that plan, whether everyone is following that plan or not, whether everything is on time or not. And they, after that, they keep a track and send it to the send the status reports to the senior management, wherein okay, our project is now in a good shape, and this is the status that we should send it to the um, senior management. So he essentially deals with your day-to-day responsibilities like planning, tracking, and monitoring. Then comes your PMO or the staff. Again, they are a bunch of people who gives certain information when and where it is needed in terms of executing a particular project. So every organization has a PMO office, project manager management office, wherein the project managers reach out to for any help they need in terms of executing that particular project. So you can consider it as a COE, Center of Excellence, associated with a particular domain or a particular organization. The PME operates pretty much more or less the same way. Then we have a project accountant. Now, project accountant is a person who is accountant, who should be held responsible for the procurement or any XYZ, what I would say, needs of a particular project. For example, let's say your project is being transitioned from one company to another. So there would be a project accountant who would keep track of that particular transition. Now, anything that arises out of that transition phase would go to your project accountant. Then you have team leader. Now, team leader is like a part of every role in your IT industry. A business analyst would also have a team leader. A developer would also have a team leader. A testing guy would also have a team leader. So it's like he would be responsible for managing the team, not the project. So he would be having 4 or 5 people under them, and he would be managing that particular 4 or 5 people under him. Now that doesn't mean he won't do any work. So 50% of his time is reserved for doing his work, and 50% of his time is reserved for managing the 4 or 5 people who is working under them. So this particular role is being taken over by project manager. Sorry, the project manager role is being taken over by a team leader role, because pretty much they overlap with each other. Their responsibilities overlap with each other. So these days, projects do not prefer having these two roles in one particular project. Either there would be a project manager and rest everyone would be reporting to that project manager, or either there would be a team leader and rest everyone in the team would be reporting to that particular team leader. So companies started cost cutting either of these roles, project manager and team leader. Then there is organizational change manager. He is more at a strategic level. This particular person is responsible for implementing the changes that happen to a particular organization. For example, doing away with annual review process and implementing a monthly review process for all the employees in a particular organization. So that is an organization change. So that particular changes would be implemented by your organization change manager. For example, we would be now following a work from home policy. So that is an organizational change. So that would be managed and approved by your organizational change manager. Anything that happens at an organizational level and applicable for all employees is a responsibility of organizational change manager. Then there is communication specialist, who communicates your achievements, goals, strategies, vision, mission of your particular organization. So you can say the PR guys, they are part of your communication specialist team. Then there is business process reengineering specialist, who actually inspects your project processes. Like you are having a particular system. So every system would be having a XYZ process. So he would examine your process and he would give suggestion on how to re-engineer those processes. So re-engineering is nothing but improving that particular process. So that is something would be taken care of by business process re-engineering specialist. Now then there is process owner. Now, process owner is a person who would be having the overall control, authority, and accountability for all the business process. For example, your credit card approval process, your loan approval process, or your mortgage process. So every process would be having a process owner to it, associated to it. So he would be the single point of contact in terms of any questions, any queries, in terms of understanding and executing that particular process. He is the owner of that particular process. Then there is process specialist. So he is an expert who can give you best practice solution in terms of a business process. He could be his what I would say uh, suggestioner. Sorry, a person who can give suggestion to your process owner. So he could be a process owner's advisory in true context for a particular project. Then there is process manager as well. In like we have a portfolio manager, program manager, project manager. We also have process manager who deals with the end-to-end management of the process. And then there is process modeler, a specialist in modeling your business process. So BAs can be considered as process modeler if their work is extensively into process modeling area. So they can considered as process modeler. So there are certain job openings in today's market: process analyst, process consulting, or process modeler. They pretty much mean the same thing: a BA who is specialized into that particular process areas. Then we have solution architect. He is a technical person who has the overall control, authority, and accountability of any business processes, but from a technical perspective. Then there is a technical architect who defines your technical components of a business solution with responsibility for the technical architecture of the solution. So technical architect is a person who designs your technical architecture. Technical architecture is in what is your upstream system, what is your midstream system, what is your downstream system, how information would be exchanged via this system, in what format your information would be exchanged, are there any third party system involved in terms of these three systems? If yes, how your system would be interacting with the third party system. That is something your technical architect would do. And on top of technical architect are the solution architect who would validate your technical architect's work in terms of designing those architectural solutions. Then we have organizational design specialist, a specialist in the assessment of resourcing the needs and capability level. So he is more from a strategic perspective, or you can say a person who is in the C cadre, who is at the very top level of your management, chief technical officer or chief information officer. They can be considered as your organizational design specialist. Then we have our solution designer who designs the solution. Then we have our programmers and developers. Then we have our networking and telecommunication specialists to understand and solve the technical or infrastructure related issues or any support issues. Then we have marketing specialist, training specialist, training developers, and trainers in a particular organization. Then document or technical writer, end user are the people who would be ultimately consuming your product as a whole when you have completed development of that particular product. And then we have operation staff who would be using that particular product, like your call center or back office executive. Then we have lawyers, legal advisor in a particular company. Then we have external auditor, internal auditor in a particular company. So we do have quality manager, quality auditor, and business analyst. So we would extensively examining the role of business analyst. Now, why we had all this categorization in place? Because more or less at some point of time, a BA has to interface with these stakeholders. So whatever you see, external regulator, quality manager, quality auditor, or lawyer, external auditor, internal auditor, end user, they are nothing but your stakeholder to whom your business analyst would reach out to in terms of clarifying a requirement or in terms of understanding or gathering a requirement. So that's a reason why we saw this user roles which exist in IT project industry to help ourselves familiarize with what are the typical roles that exist in an IT industry. And now we would examine the BA roles and responsibility and what is this program intended for. Any questions, anyone so far? Okay, so now we would try to understand how typically a project comes to an organization. Now we have talked a lot about projects. We understood the nature of the project, the category of project, the pricing of the project. Now we would understand how essentially a project comes to an organization. So you would typically come often across these terms: RFP, RFI, and RFQ. So RFP stands for request for proposal, RFI stands for request for information, and RFQ stands for request for quotation. Now, what are these things? Now, essentially, these activities are done as part of your pre-project activities. Pre-project activities, as in the project has not yet started. You are in the process of getting that project from an outsourcing company. Like for example, I'm the vendor company Accenture. I'm in the process of getting project from Apple, who is an outsourcing company. So what are the steps that follows when this process happens? So essentially, there are three things that are happening over here. One is your request for proposal, one is for request for quotation, and the third is request for information. So RFP is a document in which business needs appear. Now, what is need? Need is a particular condition wherein a project is initiated. For example, what is the actual need of initiating a particular project? If we don't do that particular project, how would be the impact of that particular project to the business? So your need justifies your request for proposal, why you want this particular project. Then comes your quotation. So quotation is nothing but your standard business process whose purpose is to invite suppliers into a business bidding process to bid on a specific product or services. And then comes your request for information, which documents your project specific activities, deliverables, and timelines for a vendor providing services to the client. So let us examine what are these three. So we have request for proposal, which defines our needs. Then we have request for quotation, which defines the necessary standards and processes, which also includes the pricing information. And then we have our request for information. The request for information is any supporting documents or research that you provide along with your quotation. Now, what is need? That is first thing we would examine. So let's say there are two entities. One is your outsourcing entity, let's say Apple Systems. Then there is your vendor entity. Let's say Accenture is a vendor. Now, whether Accenture would be a vendor or not, that is something we would define later, or we would understand later. First, we consider the request for proposal from Apple system. Now, the need or business objective that Apple system is intending to achieve by initiating this project is like implementing a sales distribution system. Now this is their particular need for which they want to create a particular project or they want to execute a particular project. Now what they are intending to achieve out of this project, there would be a certain feature. For example, enrollment of sales channels. Feature 2 would be enrollment of distributors across states and cities. Feature 3 would be onboarding logistic partners to distribute products in timely manner. Now these are the three core features they are intending out of this project, implementing a sales distribution system. Now Apple understood their need. They have created a request for proposal. Now the next thing what they want to do is they want to invite bids. Okay, invite bids as in terms of how much resources it would take to complete this system, what should be the cost of the system, and whether the company who would be taking this project, whether they have the calibrate to develop this particular system or not. Now after that they initiate their particular bid via request for quotation. Now in that particular bid they ask vendors to respond to their bid. Okay. Now what vendor did, they responded to their bid with request for information with the supporting information. For example, let's say vendor 1 Accenture, they gave a quotation of let's say 16 million. Then they gave a timeline of let's say 1 year. Within 1 year they can complete this particular project, and they gave a resource strength of let's say 50 resources who can complete this project within a timeline of 1 year, and the quotation given by Accenture is 16 million. Now there is vendor 2 who is responding to that particular bid. Now vendor 2 could be let's say Deloitte. They gave a quotation of let's say 14 million. The resources and timeline is same. Then there is vendor 3. Vendor 3 is let's say it's PwC. They gave a quotation of 18 million and they increased the resources of 70 from 50 to 70, and the timeline is same, 1 year. Now Apple received all these bids and they went through their bids and the supporting information which these three companies provided to them. Now they want to do a thorough analysis of whom they should award this contract or honor this contract. So what do you think? Which vendor should be getting this contract depending on these parameters?
most probably Deloitte getting.
Yes. So in the first round of evaluation of the vendor, they saw that Deloitte is a strong competitor. Now let me add one more parameter, right? Project success rate, 80%. Project success rate, 60%. Project success rate, 90%. So project success rate is like these companies have already developed project for other clients of similar nature. They have already developed a system for implementing a sales distribution like Apple is seeking, but for a different client. So their project success rate is this. Now, what do you think? Who should get the contract?
PwC.
I think it depends what is the cost center of the organization. If they are willing to spend that amount of extra 2 million,
Mhm.
then it will be PwC. Otherwise, it will go to Accenture.
Yes, absolutely. So when they are deciding on the vendor negotiation or vendor finalization, there is not essentially the pricing, timeline, or resources, the important parameters. There are also parameters like project success rate, or there could be parameters like skilled resources. Why skilled resources is a parameter? They award you the project, and tomorrow you say that to start this project we don't have the skilled resources, we have to start hiring afresh. So that doesn't help them, because ultimately the timeline from 1 year, it would add up to, let's say, 3 more months. Okay, so you do or not, intentional or unintentional, if you do not have skilled resources, you cannot execute the project. So these are some of the parameters that needs to be taken into the consideration when Apple would be finalizing a particular vendor. So it's not upfront based on your price, time, and resource. There are also additional parameters associated to it. So, like you said, it is very difficult to judge at this point of time who would get the contract. But to summarize, these all things happen when your project comes to an organization or during the initiation of the project by any outsourcing company. And towards the end, after going through all this analysis, multiple round of evaluation, they would finalize one vendor to whom they would award that particular contract. So that is essentially the purpose of your request for proposal, request for quotation, and request for information. Now, if we see request for proposal, there are many things that we need to understand in terms of request for proposal, how the document look like. So the first thing that we would do in a request for proposal is we would start gathering information like why this project is needed, what is the need of this particular project. So that we would document in terms of statement of purpose. What is the purpose of this project? Then who, like who would be executing this particular project? A brief about your organization. Okay, like I'm Accenture, sorry, we represent Accenture. We have this much capabilities, this much maturity in terms of delivering this project. In our past timeline, you can put some graphs or charts indicating that, okay, we have successfully delivered this particular project. Our organization specializes in this particular area. So this is wherein you give a brief information about who you are in that particular request for proposal. After that, what? So what is where you define the scope of work, what all things you would be delivering to them. So something Apple has already given to you, that these are the three core features they would be needing. In addition to that, what you can give to them, that is something you have to brainstorm amongst your organizational consultants, like what are the other features that we could deliver against our peers. Peers is nothing but your Deloitte and PwC. So what they could be offering and what unique we could be offering, that is something we could give to them. So you would be defining your scope of work, outcome, performance standard, and deliverables, what you would be ultimately giving to them at the end of uh, this project. After that, how? How as in, what is the nature of the contract? Whether it's a fixed bid contract, whether it would be a billing contract, you have to mention from your perspective as a vendor. So Accenture would say the amount of work is more and it is highly flexible in nature, we would go for time and material. Deloitte would say, okay, we have already handled this nature of project, we would essentially go with fixed bid project. So that is something you would define in terms of contract. Then you would be defining the payment incentives and penalties. Now, what does these three things mean? Payments, incentive, and penalty. So payment is like, if the contract value is 16 million, once the contract is signed, the outsourcing company won't pay you upfront 16 million. There would be some milestones created. For example, once the analysis phase is over, you would get 4 million. Once the development phase is over, you would get next 8 million out of that 16 million. And once the final project is delivered, you would be getting the final amount. So they would be making payments in parts depending on the milestone defined by you. Like, what is the milestone? After completing that milestone, you would be receiving a payment. Then comes your incentive part. Now, what is incentive? Let's say you defined a particular milestone that you would complete analysis work within 3 months. Now you complete that analysis work within 2.5 months. So there would be an incentive linked to that particular payment. So they would give you some extra amount in terms of the reason being you have completed their work ahead of time. Then there is penalty. Penalty is like, it won't be charged on the milestone, rather it would be charged on the entire contract of 16 million towards the end of the project. So let's say you first agreed on 1 year contract, 1 year duration for completing that particular project, and now your project is expanding to another 2 to 3 months. So your contract would be having a penalty clause wherein you would be penalized by outsourcing company like Apple. They would say you didn't complete your project on time, then you have to pay 1% of the contract, or we would deduct 1% of the contract amount and pay the final amount to you. Now this is the penalty at the contract level. Now what about the penalty at the bug level? Because when you are defining the service level agreement or SLAs, there are multiple things that you need to investigate. So it's not essentially always at the timelines, how soon or how late you complete the project. There are penalties associated with other service level agreements as well. For example, you wrote in your SLA that your page would load within 10 seconds. Now, instead of loading in 10 seconds, it is taking 15 seconds. So that's a breach of SLA. So in that also you have to pay a penalty. So those are called as SLA linked penalties, which are also part of your request for proposal. If you delivered, let's say your outsourcing company says 90% of the product has to be error free. Now instead of 90%, you are giving them 80% product which is error free. So that 10% deviation would cover this penalty. So in true sense, in real scenario, incentives are very likely to happen, but penalties happen more often because you know sales team have a different mindset, development team has a different mindset, and business analyst have a different mindset, and the customer has a different mindset. So when all this unique mindset they get combined, the outcome is cannot be explained. So penalties are more in comparison to incentives in true sense. Then there are certain other contractual terms and conditions. Now what are these other contractual terms and conditions? For example, your system would be having a dependency on any other system. For example, you want to develop a document management library. Now that particular document management library has a dependency on Microsoft SharePoint. Now, if you don't have that particular version installed on let's say in a stipulated amount of time or an agreed timeline, you cannot start your coding or development. So that would come under contractual terms and condition if there is a dependency on any XYZ third party vendor in order to complete your work. So that would be outlined in this your contractual terms and condition. Then your request for proposal preparation would happen, and eventually you would evaluate and award the RFP process. After that comes when. When is like when you start information gathering. So you tend to ask different questions in their proposal, because those 3-liners or 4-liners is not sufficient. You need to ask them in detail, like what is their actual expectation and what is the timelines in and around they would be needing this particular system. From your side, you have given them 1 year of timeline, but what is their expectation and what is their time frame in terms of selecting this particular process? Who all are the people who would be using this system? Will there be any deviation in terms of usage of that particular system by a certain category of people? So those all things would be asked in your information gathering phase, which is your when. Depending on this question, you would be populating like process schedule and point of contact for future reference. This question, like who are the people responsible for this particular proposal, would ultimately help you create the RACI matrix, like who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed. So that all thing would come to you, would come in this document only after you have asked this necessary set of questions to the stakeholders or via your request for proposal. If it is not a direct to or face-to-face interaction with your stakeholder, you can put this question in your proposal, let them respond to it. After that, after all our information gathering is done, we would leverage the information for creating of request for proposal. So until now, we were gathering the information. Now we would use that information for creating our request for proposal. So first thing is your statement of purpose, which would come to us only after we have thoroughly examined the need of that particular project or why they need that particular project. Background information is like brief summary of our organization, what our organization does, who all our customer, and what all things we have delivered in our past, any achievements. Those kind of thing would come under background information. And what is the scope of work, what are the in-scope item, what are out-scope item, we would highlight it. Then what are the outcome and performance standards, like what we are achieving out of this particular project, or what is our target in terms of completion of this project. Once the project is completed, what we intend to achieve. That kind of thing would come under outcome and performance standards. Then would be the deliverables. So here we would be writing the entire list of features or functionalities that we would be delivering after we have executed this particular project. Then comes your terms of contract, like your awards, risk, penalties, all those things, and any dependency to the external system, all those things. Then payment, incentive, and penalties, if there are any exclusive thing that you need to highlight and it is very important for the customer to know about it, then that you would be including in this particular section. So terms of contract can have a soft touch to payment, incentive, and penalties in an very formal way, and here we would be highlighting them in a very clean way, which is quantifiable in nature depending on the assailant. So here we would be using a very formal language. Here we would be highlighting the statistics or the demographics pertaining to that clearly and precisely. Then comes your contractual terms and condition, like your certification, your assurance, if we are giving assurity to the outsourcing company that we would be delivering this project in 1 year period of time, then we would be mentioning that in the contract. And if we are saying that there is any XYZ thing that we would be delivering over and above, committing something, that would be given in terms of contractual terms and conditions. Then we would prepare our request for proposal, evaluation and award process, wherein we would lay down the process, the criteria. We would go on defining the milestones like 3 months analysis, 4 months development, 2 months testing, and so on. After that, we would write the process schedules. What are the processes that we would be doing in terms of executing this particular project, and at the end we would be giving our contact details. So why we need to give our contact details? If in case in the bidding process our proposal is selected, then they can reach out to us by contacting via that particular email. So that is the reason why we give contact details. Now, if you see an actual request for proposal, it pretty much looks something like this, wherein you have the name of the company, wherein you are giving that particular, preparing that particular proposal as a vendor, then the project name, then the company name and address, the date, and then you have these sections: summary, background, proposal guidelines, project purpose and description, project scope, request for proposal and project timeline, budget, bidder qualification, proposal evaluation criteria. It looks something like this. If you go on, every section would be having some details like this, which we have already seen. Now remember one thing, every organization would be having their own template for this request for proposal. So this is a very generic template. Your organization would be having your own customized format of request for proposal. Pretty much the content would be same, but the format, the template or the designing part would be different for every organization. Eventually they solve the same purpose. Any questions, anyone so far? Okay, in that case let me ask you the question. So let's say you are joining as a new business analyst to an organization and you have been asked to work on a request for proposal, and you don't know whom to reach out to. So according to you, what would be your first step in terms of creating request for proposal? You got my question, right, everyone? Okay.
Yeah. I will ask if there is any available template or existing template.
Perfect. To whom? Who is that particular person or team from whom you would get this template?
Project owner.
Okay, any other views? Okay, so let me give you the answer. So in every organization, there is a group called as competency group. Now this competency group are different for different organization. So some organization may say it as domain specific group. For example, if you are tagged to a finance domain project, they would say as that finance COE, Center of Excellence. If you are tagged to an insurance project, they would say as insurance COE. Some organizations say it as insurance practice or finance practice, and some organizations simply say it as competency group. So this is the group to whom you need to reach out to for any template needs to start with your work. whether it's a BRT, whether it's a functional specification document, whether it's request for proposal, anything that you feel like to request or that you need initially to start your project work, this is the group you need to reach out to. So you would essentially be tagged to any one of this group when you join a particular organization. Just have a track on it, who are the responsible person who is managing this particular group. So that is the person who would facilitate these templates to you for your use. Okay, now what is project lifecycle? Now we have seen projects, we have seen all those XYZ stuff. Now we would understand what is project lifecycle. So this is how your project lifecycle looks like. So you would be having a project which is you would be having n number of projects which are in pipeline. Now if anyone have ever came across this situation wherein your project is ending and you are reaching out to your resource management team and saying that, are there any projects wherein I can get tagged to? So your resource management team says there are multiple projects in pipeline. Now what is those what does they mean, the project is in pipeline? So project is in pipeline means the project is not yet officially approved. It is still in the phase of request for proposal and final contract is yet to be signed off. So those projects are always there in pipeline. So wherein you know your high level requirements of the project, but because the contract is not signed, you cannot start with that particular project. Now, an obvious question that may come to you is, are the projects, the list of projects which are available in pipeline, is it guaranteed that they would come to your organization always? So the answer is no. The projects, they go out of pipeline at any point of time because an official contract is not in place. Once every due diligence is done, once an official contract is signed, then only these phases starts: your initiation, planning, implementation, handover, and close. Without official contract signing, the projects are always in pipeline. So it is not guaranteed that a project which is in pipeline would come to your organization. Only after signing the contract, it comes to your organization. So that is the reason why you could see approval to proceed over here. Okay. After that, once the approval is gained, once the official contracts or due diligence are done, the project activity starts. So essentially your initiation of project starts. So here you have the business case, you have the scope defined clearly, you have the project schedule defined, you have the project board, project teams identified, you have all the necessary baseline, the key performance indicators, the resources, people, physical, they are identified, and we have the necessary approval to proceed. After that, we go to planning phase, wherein the project manager, they plan the objectives and deliverables of the project. They baseline the KPIs, they design all the plans and all those things. Whatever planning that needs to be done happens over here. Now remember, when the project comes into planning, there are essentially multiple approaches in terms of planning a project. The approach is like, the project manager approach is different from a business analyst approach in terms of planning and in terms of development approach and quality planning approach. So everyone would be having their own approach of planning a particular project, which would be collated with your project manager's plan. So project manager's responsibility is essentially to plan, track, and project as a whole. That includes your business analyst, your developers, and your quality analyst. But it's individual areas responsibility, areas as in BA areas responsibility, your QA areas responsibility, your developer areas responsibility to come up with their own plans in terms of executing this particular project. So ultimately, all of these plans would be collected and your work items would be created by your project manager during your planning phase. After that, your project would start implementing. So implementing can have your analysis and development go hand on hand. For example, during planning phase, you have gathered enough requirement for next 2 months work to the development team. So you would be handing over those 2 months analysis document to the development team so that they can start implementing those particular requirements. Meanwhile, you as a business analyst would start working on the other set of requirements. So that is how things work in implementation phase. After that, you have the handover phase. That is the actual delivery of the project to your customer. Now, once you have implemented, once you have done your testing and all those stuff, once you have done all the necessary due diligence in and around checking the quality of the project, you hand over that particular project to your customer. And after that, you officially close that particular project once the customer gives an official sign off around now the project is done and it is good to close that particular project. So this is how your project life cycle works. Now, do not compare this project life cycle with waterfall model or agile model or business analysis life cycle. They are completely different. Today we are only talking about project life cycle, how a typical project works. So those life cycle we would be covering in our subsequent session. Now let us quickly see the documentation that we need to provide in each of these phases. Now, in pipeline, since the project is not confirmed and we are not sure whether the project would come to our organization or not, there is absolute no documentation needed. During initiation, we need to create a project mandate document. Now, what is project mandate document? Project mandate document is like you create a necessary set of guidelines wherein without which your project cannot execute. For example, business case is a mandate. Without business case, you cannot start with your project. A scope is a mandate. Without scope, you cannot start with your project. Then your baselines, your project team, your project board, they are all a mandate thing without which you cannot start with your project. So that is something produced in your initiation document, initiation phase. Then during planning phase, uh, we tend to create documents like project plan, requirements document, test plan, handover plan, and your scheduling part. So these all documents we create on planning phase. During implementation phase, we create an updated project plan. So it's not an hard and fast rule that once the project plan is created, it cannot be updated. It can be updated. So if we have an updated project plan, then we deliver it in our implementation phase. Then we create some status reports, then risk and issue log, then change log, test log, any lessons learned log. Now, what is lessons learned? Lessons learned is like you cannot expect, being human being, you cannot expect that everyone would do their work without any error. There are always some challenging opportunities from which we learn. There are always some mistakes which we do, but we, in order to ensure that we do not repeat that mistake again, we capture them as lessons learned. If such situation comes again, then what is the mitigation plan that we need to put in place? So that is something that would come under lessons learned. After that, during your handover phase, we would be delivering the lessons learned document along with PIR. PIR is our post implementation review document which we create in conjunction with the business stakeholder who has given this particular project to us. After that, we get an approval for this project closure and the project would be closed successfully. Now then, any questions, anyone so far? Okay.
So business analyst comes in the implementation phase, the role of business analyst.
That I would come to in our subsequent session. Actually, business analysis phases are different. Like we saw project management phases, Business analysis phases are like your discovery phase, your pre-study phase, your analysis phase, your designing phase, your elicitation phase. So they have a different set of phase that we would see in subsequent session. Okay. Okay. Now coming to the project execution framework and domains within IT industry. So these are some of the popular execution frameworks which are available in IT industry. We have Agile Scrum, Extended Agile Model, Scaled Agile Framework, Extensive Programming, Kanban, DevOps, Prince2, Prince2 Agile, PMP. So these are execution frameworks via which we execute our project. Then we have domains. We have all this banking, financial services, insurance, manufacturing, high tech, oil and gas, healthcare, media and entertainment. And then we have processes and architectures. So architectures are at the coding level, programming level, like MVP or MVC, MVVM, N-tier architecture, 3-tier architecture. These are at the programming language, how the system is architectured. And then there are processes like test-driven development, behavior-driven development, or any XYZ processes that follow. Now together, in order to complete a particular project, we need all these four things. We would be essentially operating in one of the execution framework. We would be essentially working on one of the particular domain. We would be dealing with one of the particular process, and our system would be developed in and around one of this particular architecture. So together, they all contribute towards complete project deliverable. So to summarize, in our today's session, we saw what is how the IT industry is organized, what are projects in IT industry, what are processes in IT industry, the organization departments in IT industry. We saw the difference between service and product-based companies. We saw the difference between fixed price and billing projects. We understood what is project, program, and portfolio in terms of a particular organization. We saw some of the domains within IT industry, and we saw the different type of project engagement within IT industry. Now I'm open for questions. Whatever questions you have, please ask.